after 3,000 Sikhs were killed on the streets of Delhi, Rajiv Gandhi spared no thought for the affected community in that very city while addressing his first public meeting as Prime Minister, commemorating the first birth anniversary of his deceased mother and predecessor Indira Gandhi. Instead, Rajiv Gandhi said what sounded to many as a justification for the massacre. Professor Khalidi referred to it, when a big tree falls, the earth is bound to shake. So did the people of India react to Rajiv Gandhi's insensitivity to Sikhs in the manner in which the people of the United States reacted to McDonald's insensitivity to African Americans? No. Rajiv Gandhi did not suffer the mortification of apologizing, nor making any amends for his omission. On the contrary, within a few weeks, he was rewarded with the biggest ever, the greatest ever electoral mandate any Prime Minister ever got in India. Democracy, Indian style, trumped the rule of law. Sure enough, such naked display of majoritarianism made it all the more difficult for victims to bring violence perpetrators to justice. I shall, however, come to that in a moment. Let me now tell you about the big news I had heard before I boarded my flight in Delhi 3 days ago. Suddenly, a senior minister in the Manmohan Singh government, Kamal Nath, received summons from a New York court for his alleged complicity in the 1984 carnage. However symbolic the case, based as it is on a suit filed under the Alien Torts Claims Act, the very issue of such summons in the US, 25 years after the cause of action, is a measure of the vast gap between the precept and practice of the rule of law in India, especially when it comes to the accountability of political leaders for their alleged involvement in mass killings. Taking undue advantage of this gap, Kamal Nath pretended as though he was surprised not only by the summons, but also by the very suggestion that he was involved in the 1984 carnage. The allegations made against other Congress leaders such as Jagdish Tytler and Sajjan Kumar might be more serious, but the evidence against Kamal Nath is the strongest. For he is the only leader whose name figures in contemporaneous police records of the 1984 carnage. While other leaders have been named essentially by victims, who are by definition interested parties, Kamal Nath, who was then a first-time member of parliament, is the only one whose presence on the scene of crime was confirmed by the police and corroborated by a journalist. For the incident in question took place in front of a centrally located Rakabganj Gurudwara, which is right next to the Parliament House. Little wonder then that Kamal Nath had no option but to admit his presence at the Rakabganj Gurudwara when he was issued a notice by a commission of inquiry 2 decades later. Though his reply was found to be quote-unquote vague, the Justice Nanavati Commission gave him the benefit of the doubt because of the passage of time, saying that, I quote, probably for that reason, the reason being the long passage of time, probably for that reason, he was not able to give more details as regards when and how he went there and what he did there. Close quotes. The shame of receiving summons now from an American court, even if it is only in a civil suit for damages, will hopefully refresh his memory and serve as a cautionary tale on political complicity in mass violence. Since my brief is to look at the experience and prospects of justice in the context of the 1984 carnage, I would like to draw on the structure of impunity discussed yesterday by keynote speaker Professor Paul Brass. I was the one who sent him a slip during the question answer session, asking whether he should not have included the judiciary in his concept of the structure of impunity. As a journalist who observed machinations in the judiciary over the years to shield culprits of the 1984 carnage, I was rather gratified to hear Professor Brass admit that it was perhaps an omission on his part to have overlooked the role played by judges in what he had so evocatively described as the IRS, institutionalized riot system. Let me now try and show how the judiciary, despite being the holy cow that it is in India, has been an extension of the structure of impunity vis-a-vis the 1984 cases. The dubiousness of its conduct is evident from the wild fluctuations in its attitude, depending on political circumstances or the integrity of individual judges. Here are some of the reasons and instances to support my argument that the judiciary has, on the whole, been part of the problem rather than the solution. Consider the blatant hostility displayed by the Delhi High Court to petitions of public interest litigation filed within months of the carnage to secure justice to victims in the most adverse circumstances. Since one of the petitioners, a human rights group called People's Union for Democratic Rights, India, had brought out a booklet called Who Are the Guilty, presiding Judge Yogeshwar Dayal launched into a gratuitous attack saying, I quote, "I have no respect for your report. These professors should not investigate." Quotes close. Had he still been alive, I wonder what Justice Dayal would have said about these professors who organized today's workshop on an equally subversive subject. Anyway, that's how, when the evidence against the perpetrators of the carnage was still fresh, the judiciary added to the climate of impunity, taking cue, perhaps, from Rajiv Gandhi's infamous big tree shaking the earth speech. In fact, if Rajiv Gandhi blocked the demand for a judicial inquiry for months, saying that it would, quote unquote, reopen old wounds, Justice Dayal said that such fact-finding would, quote unquote, fan communal riots. And when an inquiry was finally set up as a prelude to an accord dealing with conflict in Punjab, a Supreme Court judge entrusted with it made no secret of his collusion with the government to ensure that nothing embarrassing came out of that exercise. While announcing the procedure of his inquiry, Justice Ranganath Mishra was blatant enough to frame a rule saying that all the proceedings would be conducted in camera. Sure enough, the veil of secrecy was used to prevent the public from coming to know about the intimidation of witnesses and manipulation of evidence that surfaced during the inquiry. You will find details of this judicial cover-up and other such manipulations in the courts in a book written by me and Advocate Fulka, when it reached Delhi. Sorry to be plugging for my book. The saving grace is that when a second judicial inquiry was instituted several years later in vastly different political circumstances, and in a bid to undo the damage done by Mishra to the cause of justice, G.T. Nanavati, another former Supreme Court judge, had no option but to resort to the norm of holding most of the proceedings in public. So, unlike Mishra, he was forced to issue notices to all the leaders named in the affidavits filed by victims and witnesses. The notices included Minister Kamal Nath, of course, former Minister Jagdish Taitler and former MP Sajjan Kumar, and two leaders who have since expired.